Thank you for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here. Just for a little context, I actually used to work at the Northwest Michigan Horticulture Research Center. I worked there for 3 summers with Nikki Rothwell and that team. So I always am excited to come back and visit a place that I call home. I'm originally from Charlevoix, Michigan, and grew up on a specialty crops farm. So agriculture is very near and dear to me, and so is Northwest Michigan. So to get started, we're going to talk about hemp and cannabis and the green rush, or is it a big bust? And that is up to different people's opinions. So I'll give you my opinion based on some evidence over the last 5 years of research that I've done. So first, who is familiar with what cannabis sativa actually is? Has anybody seen cannabis, experienced cannabis? Some people don't want to admit that. But that includes hemp, right? So cannabis is hemp and marijuana. They're both the same plant species, genetically very, very similar. They can readily interbreed. Cannabis is an annual plant, so it's something that we're going to seed or grow every year. It's not a perennial. It's not going to persist through the winter. It is a wind-pollinated plant, which is another thing that people get confused about, right? Can bees get high? No, not really. It's wind-pollinated. You can see in that photo. That's actually pollen being shed from the plant. And it's dioecious, which some people don't know what this means, but what it means is that the plant exists in separate male and female forms. And so in that photo, you have a male plant shedding pollen. In a marijuana or CBD production system, you're producing only females, kind of similar to hops production. So how do we separate those two then? How do we separate marijuana and hemp, right? There are a couple ways you can do it. So there's the legal definition. Hemp has no more than 0.3% THC, the psychoactive compound found in cannabis plants, on a dry weight basis. I'm not going to call anybody out and ask if you've been to dispensaries, but usually when you go either a medical or recreational dispensary, your THC content in the flower material is well over 10% THC. So 0.3% is really, really minuscule. You're not going to get high from smoking a hemp plant, even though people may claim that it's not going to happen. You can also separate them by use, and that's usually what I talk about, is what is the use type. So hemp kind of falls in these general categories. You have fiber production, seed oil production, you have whole seed, food and feed, and then you have cannabinoids. That could be CBD, CBG, one of the other 100 other compounds that this plant produces outside of just THC. And then you have marijuana, right? It's produced for THC, the psychoactive compound, and then other cannabinoids. So you can also breed marijuana plants that have both high amounts of THC and CBD and other compounds. So we can separate them sort of the two ways, but legally, growers have to produce this low THC content plant to be called hemp. Just a brief history, too, because this is a question I get a lot. Hemp is not native or endemic to North America. Most scientists believe it emerged somewhere in Asia. It's up for a debate whether it was Central, East, West China, but they believe it arose in that area and then moved westward with humans into Europe, Africa. It has a pretty rich history in India, and then eventually made it to North America and South America, where we grew it predominantly for fiber applications. In other areas, they used it for spiritual and religious purposes, so they were selectively breeding for higher THC for thousands of years. We think domestication of this plant was 12 to 10,000 years ago, so pretty rich history with humans. And then just a more recent history of the US, it was a really important textile fiber in the 1800s in the United States, where it was predominantly produced in Kentucky. And if any of you were familiar with the 2014 Farm Bill, one of the biggest proponents was Mitch McConnell, because he wanted to see hemp come back to Kentucky because it had such an important history in their state. But we saw it dwindle, partially because it was competing with cotton and with the timber industry. There wasn't as much demand, and then there was this Marijuana Tax Act in 1937. And this made it really expensive to grow hemp. So this was the first sort of lumping of hemp with marijuana. We saw a lot more marijuana use into the United States in the early 1900s. And so they decided to make it really expensive to grow, and they started to criminalize it. So they did start to arrest people for using cannabis products. And then we saw a resurgence in World War II. Some people might be familiar with Hemp for Victory, that short film that came out. We weren't getting natural fibers from Asia during World War II. We weren't able to. And so they were using hemp for military purposes, for textiles, for uniforms, for paracord, canvas. And then we have a complete ban in cannabis, not just in the US, but globally. So there are countries that all got together and said, we're going to ban cannabis, and we have this war on drugs. And they lumped hemp in with there and made hemp a Schedule I narcotic. So low THC content, but still in that Schedule I narcotic category. So in 1970, we really have no production globally. In the US, we get this resurgence in 2014, and this is kind of where I come in. I started in 2017 working for Purdue, but they were able to start growing hemp in 2015 through this USDA pilot program. So this allowed for production and research of hemp on a small scale research basis, so it's very controlled in most states. And then, and this is where it comes to the green rush part, in 2018, we actually see hemp removed from that controlled substance list. So marijuana is still on that federal controlled substance list, but hemp is removed now. So this allowed for commercial production of hemp across the United States. So you can ship hemp material across state lines, that's legal. Interstate commerce is fine. There's a federal hemp program through USDA. We work with Farm Service Agency. There's federal crop insurance now. So this really opened the doors for people to start exploring hemp in their state from a commercial aspect. So I mentioned those use types. I'm going to talk a little bit about applications, and then I'll talk about some of like the growth and production and economics, because I think it's important to put the plant into context, because people grow it for a lot of different reasons. Tons and tons of applications. So these are a couple photos from some Indiana farms that were producing hemp for the seed, for food items, for grain production. So you can see we have those male and female plants in there. If you've seen, again, a marijuana operation that's oftentimes grown indoors, it does not look like this. If you picked the leaves off and looked at them, they would look very similar. But if you were to go out to a field, you could feel pretty confident in that that's not marijuana. You have those male plants, and then you have seed production, which you don't see in a CBD or marijuana system. So hemp as food is becoming more and more popular because of its nutritional profile. So for people who are plant-based or are integrating plant-based foods into their diet, hemp is a great source of fatty acids and protein. And what makes it really unique is that it has omega-3 fatty acids, which a lot of seed oils and plant oils have higher omega-6. So hemp has both, and it has it in a pretty healthy ratio, which is important for people who don't eat fish enough or vegan vegetarian, because they're often lacking that omega-3 fatty acid, which is important in our diet. It also contains all 20 amino acids, which you don't see in a lot of plant proteins. So again, for that sort of plant-based market, it has a lot of value there. A good portion of the seed is oil and protein, but you also get dietary fiber. So people call hemp seed a superfood, and nutritionally it is really great for people, especially people who may have nut allergies or soy allergies and can't use those types of proteins or products. So these are some of the products that are commercially available that you could buy at your grocery stores, often found in like natural food aisles, in the protein powder sections. You have whole hemp seed material, which is often roasted, so you can't take it home and grow it yourself and germinate it. You can remove the outer shell, and that's called hemp hearts, and that's usually what people are familiar with. You can press the seed for oil, and that's like a low temperature cooking oil. And then you're left over with the seed meal or the cake, and that's what the protein powder is made out of. You also have natural care products or personal care items. So there's soaps, lip balms, lotions that are being made from the hemp seed oil. So this isn't hemp specific, but this is a figure showing the sort of growth in plant-based foods or plant-based proteins from the Good Food Institute, which has funded some hemp research. And this market is growing, and it's going to continue to grow. And if anybody has had like soy burgers or anything from like 5 or 6 years ago, they're not very good. So there's been a lot of investment into better plant-based foods, better tasting foods. So at Purdue, we're working on some hemp-based food items that are better tasting and have a better nutritional profile than some of the things that are currently available. There's also this other sector, which is not formally legal in the US at this point, but it is in Europe and parts of Canada, and that's hemp for animal feed. So I mentioned there's all these nutritional benefits for humans. Well, these benefits are also important for livestock. And so there's this process that we have to go through to get animal feed approved, and it's really lengthy. So it's research projects on each livestock species. So, oh, it didn't show. I have a chicken that was supposed to come up because that's what we're really studying right now, are laying hens. But for each animal species, you have to go through this really long, expensive, arduous process to get it approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And right now, we're looking at probably 3 to 5 years until we have federal approval for chickens grown for meat and for eggs, integrating hemp seed meal into their diets. And so that's an area that is developing, but it's going to provide a lot more potential for our farmers to profit off this crop. And there's another way you can get around that. You can file petitions, and you can do this on a state level as well. So Kentucky got a petition approved in their state, so they actually can feed hemp meal to chickens now within their state. So again, not a federal approval. Next, we have fiber, which is what I get the most excited about because it's the most diverse in its applications, and I think it has the most potential for long-term growth. So these are a couple fiber fields within Indiana. Again, you have that characteristic kind of cannabis leaf shape, but again, grown differently than what you would see for a marijuana operation. So it's grown really densely. I'd say it's more like our forage crops with the way we plant it and manage it, also the way we cut it so we can use some of our forage or hay processing equipment for this crop. But there's kind of two components that are important to understand about the stalk because they have different applications. So you have the outer bast fiber, which is sort of like if hemp was a tree, it'd be the bark, but it's the outer surface of the stalk material. And this is the fiber that you need for things like textiles. So my pants are made from hemp fiber. That's what you're going to get with your textiles. It's what you're going to use for non-woven fabrics, which I'll show a picture of in a second. And then you have the inner fiber, which is called the hurd. And this is sort of like that pithy, woody material. And that has other applications as well that I'll demonstrate. Right now, it's really popular for animal bedding because it absorbs a lot of moisture. We're investigating it as a super absorbent for food packaging, but also building materials are an emerging application for this part of the plant. But to get those materials, you have to process that stalk, and that is really expensive. So we have these processors called decorticators, and they actually mechanically separate those two components. But it takes a lot of money to build these facilities, and usually they're importing the fiber processing lines from Europe, and that takes some time to develop those processing facilities. But there are a lot of applications, so I'm going to show you just a couple of my favorite ones. I talked a little bit about this one at our meet and greet last night, but this is a product that's manufactured in Kentucky, so it is commercially available. It's called hemp wood, but it's not a wood product. It's a hemp stalk product. So they take the whole stalk material and they're able to soak it in a plant adhesive and then apply heat and pressure and make this composite flooring material. So in the top photo, that is a flooring material you could sand, stain, and finish and put in your home. And then they also make blocks of this material that you can turn on a lathe. So that bowl is made from entirely hemp stalk and soy-based adhesive. So this is sort of a novel application that has come from this industry. They've been working on this product kind of in the engineering stages starting in 2016 in Kentucky with Murray State University, and they were able to commercialize it after the Farm Bill passed in 2018. I mentioned non-woven mats. So you can make non-woven mats from an assortment of natural fibers or synthetic fibers, and then these mats can be prefabbed or made into a material that goes into car parts. So in Indiana, we actually have a processor that does this with other natural fibers and synthetic fibers, so it's a 50-50 blend. And they make this composite material that can go into vehicles. And that's becoming more and more popular to integrate these natural fibers into that, so they're reducing their plastic input for one, And hemp fiber is incredibly strong. So for these types of materials, it makes a really durable, light car part. And then we have plastics, which is another area that is sort of emerging in the hemp industry. And plant-based plastics aren't particularly new. We see plant-based plastics becoming more popular. But this particular product is manufactured in Colorado, and they take the waste product from processing hemp plants for CBD. So you're left over with all this biomass material, and they are able to mix it with a plant-based polymer to make pellets for single-use plastic applications. And they're completely biodegradable. So they can make water bottles, plastic bags, shrink wrap, filament like in that photo for 3D printers. So this is another area that is gaining in popularity for application of a waste product. It can be made from the fiber as well, but kind of a neat use of the plant. And then building materials. This one is also gaining a lot of popularity because now international building codes recognize hempcrete, or a material of that inner woody part of the plant, lime and water, as a way to insulate homes. So this is a stick-built home in Chelsea, outside of Chelsea, Michigan. So this is actually one you could drive down and visit that uses that hempcrete. So that material that you can see, that's actually made from that hemp lime-water combination. And this is an area that, again, is growing pretty rapidly. There's other types of insulation they can make. They can pack it in, they can make blocks, they can do blown-in insulation, and then they can also do a fiberglass alternative batting insulation. So pretty neat what they're doing for residential construction. And lastly, we have CBD production, or cannabinoid production. This is the system that's going to look the most similar to marijuana production. The plants are all female in the system. Ideally, you don't want male plants pollinating and setting seed and reducing the quality and potency of your plants. It can be grown indoor or outdoors. Both type of production models are frequently observed for cannabinoid hemp. But you can see here we have different sort of ways to produce it, which leads to different cost of production. And this is really what that green rush was in 2019. Is anybody familiar with CBD, taken it, know about it? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, that's what people are usually the most familiar with. It's either fiber for rope or CBD for a variety of medical ailments. So CBD, or cannabidiol, is a plant compound produced by cannabis plants. It's non-psychoactive, so you're not going to get high from taking a CBD tincture. But it is something that people are taking for a variety of reasons. So different sort of applications include, anxiety, sleep, pain. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to say that that's what these all work for. But we do know that there's an FDA-approved drug that contains CBD for epilepsy. So we know there are, researched applications of this. And often you find them in tinctures, like in that photo. So with, droppers of the oil, salves, soft gels, and then the FDA doesn't approve this, but you can find it added to food and beverages. To get this oil, though, it's it's expensive, it's time-consuming, it requires a processing facility. You can't just mechanically crush it like seed oil, which can confuse people. So seed oil and CBD oil are different parts of the plant. They're processed differently. And to do that, you typically use a solvent. So that could be ethanol. You could use hydrocarbons like butane or hexane, which are flammable and explosive, so generally not recommended for extraction. You can use carbon dioxide in a supercritical state, and that actually separates the CBD from the plant's fats and waxes and other sort of waste products. And then novel techniques. So there are people who are doing like a water-based extraction. You can use heat and pressure, so there are special presses that help extract the material. But you have to have some kind of processing to get CBD oil. And then there are other applications. Is anybody familiar with Delta-8, tetrahydrocannabinol? Okay, that's probably good. It's not necessarily the most positive application in the industry right now. There are a lot of states, including Indiana, that are trying to ban it because it's a psychoactive compound. Similar to Delta-9 THC, a lot of people call it like the little sister or THC light because it's not as psychoactive, at least people are experiencing it's not, compared to Delta-9 THC. So what the industry has done, they saw this crash right after 2019. There was overproduction of CBD and not enough demand. So they tried to figure out another application for the CBD molecule, and they found out you can run it through a solvent-based extraction, manipulate the molecule, and get a psychoactive compound that is kind of in a gray area when DEA looks at THC, because it's synthesized from the hemp plant. So it's kind of this loophole that a lot of states that don't have legal marijuana production have done to find an outlet for this excess hemp material and help farmers generate additional profit. So we do have this in the state of Indiana. They really, really don't like it. But it is another application for hemp plants. So just kind of to give you an overview, when we talk about the hemp plant, you have the whole stalk material, right? That can be used for biofuel. That's another sort of emerging industry is looking at it as a fuel source. You have the stalk material, the fibers, which can go into woven, non-woven materials. It can go into building. You have the seeds and the oil, which have food applications. They're also looking at the seed oil for biodiesel. I don't know how feasible that one is, but it is another application. And then you have the flowering buds for CBD and other minor plant compounds produced by hemp. So what does production look like? This is a Canadian figure, so this is from their group. Because they've been producing hemp for longer, we often refer to sort of what they've done, what issues they've faced, what the production history has looked like there. So similar to what I'll show you in the next figure is they had an increase in production shortly after legalization, and then a decrease, and then an increase, then a decrease, and they sort of had this cyclical nature, which I expect us to see. So in the early years, it was that pilot program, right? It's 2014 Farm Bill. There's limited production, minor commercialization. States kind of interpreted laws differently as they do. So some states allowed for commercial production like Kentucky and Colorado. Indiana and Michigan did not allow for that. But then we see that surge in production in 2019, the first legal commercial year. And then we have a decrease. I don't know what production acres are going to look like this year, if we'll have an increase based on more processing for fiber. But I think we'll have a similar trend over time when we look back over 20 years to Canada and European countries as well. So just a brief, my slides got kind of messed up, so sorry about that. Just to talk a little bit about the profitability. These are numbers taken from the University of Kentucky. They have a great hemp budget model. These aren't the sort of only things that growers can expect. I have growers that have made a lot more than this. I have growers who have hemorrhaged money from producing hemp. But for grain production, our variable costs are about $400 per acre. And then their returns, that's not a negative sign, it's just a dash, about $139 per acre. So when you think about corn and soybeans, the returns aren't going to be as high as those crops right now. Hemp is not a subsidized crop, and it's not as developed of an industry. It is still relatively new. For fiber production, we have similar variable costs, about $485 per acre, and then pretty low returns, so $32. And a lot of that has to do with lack of processing locally, so growers are having to ship their material a lot farther, and then just product development, right? It takes time to develop these products, and we need consumers who want to buy these products. And then CBD production, the variable costs are a lot higher, so $7,200 per acre. Again, this can range based on production model. So in those photos I showed you, right, you have a plasticulture model, you have plastic laid down, you're bringing in labor, so a lot of hand weeding, we have limited pesticides available for this crop. And then right now the returns are really low, so $44 an acre. Again, can be highly variable. I have growers that are vertically integrated, so they're sort of like a seed to shelf system, and they're doing pretty well because they've developed a product that has been well received in their community. But for a lot of growers that just want to produce the plant and then ship it off, they're really struggling to make a profit. So there are some gaps in the industry that are leading to these issues. So one of them is the lack of processing, and this is changing pretty rapidly. So this is an image from the Hemp Industry Association. They put together this interactive map to help growers figure out where they can send their fiber crop to process. So these dots all represent different types of fiber processing facilities across North America. So prior to this year, I would say there are probably about half the number of dots. And when we started with commercial production in 2019, there were maybe 2 or 3 fiber processors across the United States that were starting to operate in anticipation for 2019. Several of which, including one in Kentucky, went bankrupt the following year. So a lot of heartache and loss in this industry, but that's changing. So we're pretty excited to see more of this fiber processing and applications develop. Licensing and regulations are another issue. So in some states, it's pretty costly to get a license. I think in Michigan, to get a hemp license, it's over $1,000 for growers. And as a farmer, that's not chump change, right? It's expensive to operate a farm, and so you add that additional licensing fee with a pretty unpredictable, return that they're going to get at the end of the season, if any at all. It makes it really challenging to convince growers to produce this crop. The regulations are also always changing. So there have been different emergency rules that have been issued in different states allowing for, minimum acreage requirements. So in Indiana, you have to produce a minimum of 10 acres for grain and fiber. And so if you want to just test out a crop on a small plot of land, they don't qualify for a licensing. And in other states, they haven't been as receptive and they haven't supported growers who want to, produce this crop. So regulations are a challenge, and we hope to see some changes in the next farm bill that help ease some of those burdens for growers. Support for the industry is another one. There is still challenges when we think about federal crop insurance, so it is difficult for farmers to qualify for that insurance, again, so introducing a lot of risk if we were to have a failure during the season, whether that's a weather-related failure or an insect or disease issue, because again, we're limited on our pesticides we can apply. Research is another area that we're lacking. So prior to 2018, we couldn't qualify for federal grants. And so a lot of the research that we were doing at Purdue was funded internally by the university, which is great, but those funds are pretty limited. So we were able to apply for a USDA grant after the Farm Bill, and we got it, which is really exciting. But prior to that, our growers were kind of just doing their own research, which farmers do. Oftentimes, they test things on their farms, figure out what works for them. But we were hoping to ease some of that burden by doing research at university farms. So, is it a green rush or a big bust? I think it's both. We did see that sort of surge in production in 2019, and then people say that the bubble sort of burst for hemp, and that rush was brought by cannabinoid hemp production or CBD hemp production. And now we're seeing a lot of people shift their perspectives and go towards fiber production and grain production. And I think that's going to be really helpful for a long-term sort of sustainable approach for hemp because there's so many applications. CBD is largely going into sort of 2 areas, Delta-8 or for sort of like nutraceutical supplement applications where grain and fiber have hundreds of thousands of different products they can go into. So I'm hopeful for this industry, but at this point it's just kind of a slow and steady, patient game for folks like me. This is my contact information. We do have a website run through Purdue. It looks a little different now, but we have all kinds of resources, contact information for people who are interested in learning more.